In this video, I'd like to discuss the cause of the Tibetan riots. Many of you may believe that the Tibetans started the riots from years of oppression from the Chinese government. This was broadcasted from every Western media source. We should ask ourselves a question: why now? Why not earlier? The Chinese government blamed the Dalai Lama for masterminding this, and this is to sabotage the 2008 Olympics. Well, I disagree with both of these claims. By the way, to all of you athletes, please remember the Olympics is not a political event. Please consider whether to boycott the Olympics after listening to this. Personally, I do not believe Dalai Lama masterminded this violent riot because the Dalai Lama is indeed a spiritual holy man. He would never promote violence. The Chinese government had to find a scapegoat for the general public in China. That's why they blamed on Dalai Lama. They did not want to introduce a hate towards the Tibetans in the general public. That's why they are censoring the reality of the murdering of innocent Han Chinese in Tibet. Hate begets more hate, and it generates prejudice. As for the shooting of the protesters, the same would have happened in every country if a violent mob was to publicly vandalize or commit murder. However, there is a Tibetan youth group that was supported by Dalai Lama in Lhasa. They are quite the extremists in their doings. I do not believe that the Dalai Lama knows this, but at this moment I believe the Dalai Lama is quite shocked and scared because he just realized how violent his people are. We can see from the media coverage that there are hundreds of rioters, and if you look closely, lots of them are carrying machetes, and even monks participated in the vandalism and destruction. Take an analogy, for instance. If this was to be a protest for independence and freedom, why would you trash your own city? Would you burn down your own house for freedom? Well, let me tell you more about the society in Tibet. Tibet is on average a few thousand meters above sea level in altitude. It's very isolated land before the 90s. Even now with the railway, it is still a rather isolated province in China, because a train ticket from Lhasa to Beijing cost about 5,000 yuan, which is roughly $1,000 US. It's a lot even for us North Americans. 50 years ago, the Tibetans had one of the lowest level of education and worst quality of life in China. However, they were not that much worse off compared to the rest of China when it comes to social policies, because government actually put a welfare system in place in Tibet. The Chinese government were always more lenient towards minority ethnic groups, not just Tibetans, every single minority group. They would receive cheaper education, cheaper medical care, more rationed food in the old days where food was very, very scarce and people were starving to death. When the Chinese economy took a turn for the better, the Tibetans were being babied by the government even more. As long as you are in a low-income Tibetan, you had a welfare check every month from the government. I believe that was a mistake by the government, because due to the nature of Tibet's location, the government gave welfare to the Tibetans just because they were an ethnic minority in an isolated province. This led to massive unemployment because they did not have to do anything to have enough to eat and wear. Alcoholism was very common among unemployed Tibetan locals. This was a data taken from the Taiwanese. Taiwanese tourists would go there and they witnessed this, and this is what they wrote. On the other hand, there are hundreds of millions of migrant workers in China right now. They work 80 hours a week for an entire year and come home once a year during the Chinese New Year to give their parents their earnings. while the Tibetans are being fed by the government with a silver spoon. Okay, so why would they protest, you ask, if I say they are being babied and really well treated by the government? Well, please note I mean the word protest simply because their spiritual leader was stolen from them. Dalai Lama was roughly in the mid-20s when he left China. Every word he utters rings to the heart of the Tibetans. The Tibetans treat him like a god. But guess what? The Western media has bought Dalai Lama with fame and money. Dalai Lama has enjoyed a life where he was welcomed by the world's powerful leaders from the West and were worshipped like a celebrity. Do you believe he would like to return to China if he had such a great life? Even I would not. All he had to do was to promote an independence movement in Tibet. But as you see, this is the greatest weapon of the West. They managed to make people kill their own countrymen simply by controlling the spiritual leader. They managed to start and win a war without firing a gun and having casualties. So this is why they protest. Now what you ask, why do they riot in a violent manner? Okay, back to talking about the extremist Tibetan youth group. Well, no matter which race, what religion, they are extremists. For example, Islam is a very, very peaceful religion, but extremists interpret things differently. Extremists gave birth to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Dalai Lama's words of independence fuel those Tibetan extremists with justification to commit violence. It's quite simple why they hate the ethnic Han so much. It's because they are relatively poor and less educated, because the nature of their province. Now, how would you feel when you've been boozing off free money for the most of your life and have achieved nearly nothing, when there are wealthy tourists rolling in every day in their Columbia ski jackets and their 4x4 SUVs? Well, it's more or less a violent burst of hatred between the rich and the poor, and the haves and have-nots. In other parts of China, there is also hatred between the rich and poor, but the Tibetan extremists used freedom and independence as an excuse. There are vandals all over China who smash car windows and arsonists who tries to burn down luxury villas simply because there's a huge gap between the rich and poor in China. And Tibet is one of the most extreme cases of social gap in China because Tibet was and is too isolated due to the nature of the province. This is the reason behind the mob and the riots and the killing of the innocent people. It becomes so obvious when I saw the footage when a huge mob of Tibetans tried to break into a bank because they wanted to get rich, just like the rest of the Chinese. So, what if Tibet becomes independent and Tibetans were granted the so-called freedom? Do you think Tibet will be a country well off if they were to be independent? Tibet literally have nothing when it comes to natural resources. Absolutely nothing. Just like Kazakhstan did not have plastic when they broke away from the former Soviet Union. And many former Soviet Union republics had taxis that had to hide their windshield wipers because they were being stolen because they could not produce them. Tibet does not have the resources right now to feed its population. Would you like the Tibetans to starve to death, or have them learn to fit in with the rest of China slowly and become intellectuals and a modern race? Please use your common sense to judge this. Thank you very much.